Hi Year 10, and thank you for joining me for our first videoed English lesson. I know lots of you have been practicing your language paper 1 skills using the extracts and the PowerPoints which we put on the school website at the start of the summer term. Please continue to use these and continue practicing your descriptive and narrative writing skills. In addition, I will be delivering weekly literature revision lessons and will focus on An Inspector Calls, Romeo and Juliet, and the Poetry Anthology. You will have studied all these texts before in school, but as you know, it is really important that you're able to retrieve your knowledge and understanding of the text for the GCSE exams. So we will be focusing on the context of the texts, plot, character, theme, and we'll be practicing some quotations which you can use in your analysis. So today's lesson is on An Inspector Calls, and we're going to focus on the historical and social context of the play, and also consider Priestley's purpose in writing this text. So as we would do in school, let's start with a do now. Got 5 questions which you're going to need to think hard about since it's been a little while since we've studied An Inspector Calls. Give yourself at least 5 minutes and then we'll go through the answers together. Pause the video now. Okay then. So question 1 asked you, what is capitalism? So capitalism is a political system in which a country's trade and industry are controlled by private owners for profit rather than the state. In contrast, socialism is a set of beliefs that states that all people are equal. And Priestley himself was a socialist, which meant that he thought that society and community was just as important as the individual. An Inspector Calls is set in a town called Brumley, which is a fictional town, so the events could relate anywhere. And the final question asked you, when was it set? And it was set in 1912. For this next task, if you have a look at the 3 pictures on this slide, have a think about what you think life was like for England's upper classes in the early 1900s. Pause the video for 2 minutes. So you might have noticed that on the table set for dinner, you've got some cut glass crystal. We've got decanters for the port. There's candles and flowers on the table. It's all very opulent, and appearances were very important for the upper classes. There was an expectation that you dressed for dinner, especially like this is showing if it was a special occasion. You've also got a picture there that you probably recognised of the Titanic. The Titanic, as you may know, sank in 1912, which was the year that this play was set. And then your final picture there, you might have recognised that as being a picture from the trenches in World War I, which was 2 years after the play was set. So we're going to look at Priestley's stage directions at the start of the play. Many playwrights give very detailed stage directions to help the producers, directors, and indeed the actors to deliver the play that they are putting on. So here we have, you can see a whole page of text given up to that. So An Inspector Calls is set in that fictional city of Brumley, and the action all takes place over one evening. And it is just before, 2 years, as I said before, World War I. It's set in the home of a prosperous factory owner, and it shows us the difference in the lifestyle between those that own the factories, who had the money and the power, and those who depended on them for work. So we're going to read through these stage directions. If you're able to print off the next slide, that might be helpful. If not, you can just read it off the screen and you can just make a note on a piece of paper. I picked out some vocabulary here before we start. So we've got the word provincial, which means relating to a province, an area, so it means where you're from. The word pretentious is used to describe Mr. Berling. It means somebody who's serious and full of self-importance and quite proud of themselves. You've got a picture there of a decanter, which I mentioned before, which would have been on the table and usually would hold something like port, some sort of alcohol. And we've got the word dandy, and a dandy is quite a dated word, but it means somebody who places a lot of importance on their physical appearance. So I'll read through with you these stage directions, and if you're able to highlight or just even think about what we learn about the characters, who they are, and what they're like. So it's set in the dining room of a fairly large suburban house. It belongs to a fairly prosperous manufacturer. It's a solidly built room with good solid furniture of the period. Upstage right, there is an alcove with a heavy sideboard, and the door from the alcove leads to the kitchen. Upstage left is a large double door used almost exclusively. A fireplace is along the right wall with the curtained window on either side. There are 2 leather armchairs on either side of the fireplace, and downstage from it is an ornate floor lamp and a small table with a telephone. A little upstage of centre is a solid but not too large dining room table with a solid set of dining room chairs around it. A few imposing but tasteless pictures and engravings. The general effect is substantial and comfortable and old-fashioned, but it's not cosy or home-like. At the rise of the curtain, the 4 Berlings and Gerald are seated at the table, with Arthur Berling at one end, his wife at the other. Eric Berling is downstage, and Sheila and Gerald Croft are seated upstage. Edna, a neatly dressed parlour maid in her late 20s, is just clearing the table, which has got no cloth, of the dessert plates, champagne glasses and champagne bottle, taking them to the sideboard and going back to the table with a decanter of port. The port glasses are already on the table. All 5 are in evening dress of the period. The men are in tails and white ties, and Arthur Berling is a heavy-looking, rather pretentious man in his middle 50s, with fairly easy manners but rather provincial in his speech. His wife is about 50, is a rather cold woman, and her husband's social superior. Sheila is a pretty girl in her early 20s and very pleased with life and rather excited. Gerald Croft is an attractive chap about 30, rather too manly to be dandy, but very much the easy, well-bred young man about town. And Eric is in his middle 20s, not quite at ease, half shy, half assertive. And at the moment, they have all had a good dinner and are celebrating a special occasion and are pleased with themselves. So I'm going to ask you to pause the video for a few minutes while you reread it, and if you can highlight anything that you've learned about the characters so far. So I've picked out a few things that you may have picked out yourself. We've learned that it's a fairly large suburban house. So, it's large, it's owned by a prosperous, means he's got some money and is a manufacturer. So this is somebody who owns a factory. It made lots of reference to the furniture inside the house. Good, solid furniture, 2 leather armchairs, substantial. All the adjectives seem to be describing it as being quite affluent. There's plenty of money in this family. It's quite, interesting that it says it's not cozy and it's not home-like. So this is all to do with, I suppose, appearances, about appearing to have money, and that might be the consequence of having not so much a homely atmosphere. We've also got reference to the parlour maid. So this is a family that has money to pay for hired help. Maybe they've got a butler as well. We've referred to the decanter of port before, and a cigarette box and cigarettes. I suppose that is indicative of the time as well. Maybe that's not something that would be on show as much as, maybe today. Then we go into the actual characters themselves. You might have picked out that Berling's heavy looking. So maybe he eats well, maybe he drinks quite a lot. He's quite pretentious, so he's quite proud, full of his own self-importance, and quite provincial in his speech. So he will have had, you know, an accent which would have shown which area he would have come from. His wife is referred to as his social superior. So she is somebody who has maybe been born into money, is regarded in society as being more higher status than he is. Then we've got their two children. We've got Sheila and Eric. She's rather excited. You know, we learn the reason why as the play starts. And Eric seems a little bit nervous, not quite confident in himself yet. And then we have the fifth character, Gerald Croft, who is, it says there that he's regarded as a bit of a dandy, all right? So somebody that, you know, seems to be a bit of a man about town. And they're all very pleased themselves because they're celebrating a special occasion. You might remember what that is. Okay, so I've put on this slide two YouTube clips for you to use. One is an audio of the play, and the other is a film adaptation. So you can refer to either or to both as you're doing your revision for an inspector calls. Obviously, if you've got a copy of the book, that would be even better. But we can use the audio or the video for now. I'd like you to listen up to the part where the doorbell rings, and that's when the inspector arrives. So I want you to listen from the beginning up until the sound of the doorbell. And if you could jot down what your first impressions are about each of the characters. So click onto one of the YouTube links now, and then as you're listening or watching, write down what your first impressions are of the characters, and then we'll go through them together. So our first impressions of Berling, you might have realised that he's the protagonist. He is the main character in this play. He is self-made, he's a businessman. It's obvious that he wants to be a social climber. He's really pleased that Sheila is going to be marrying Gerald, and he regards the Crofts as a business rival who he wants to join together to become bigger and better business partners. His wife, Mrs. Berling, we've already mentioned, is her husband's social superior, and she seems to be very concerned with social etiquette about appearances. You know, they mustn't lose face. Eric is the youngest son, and he is not really a very sympathetic character. He drinks too much, and then we later on learn about his involvement with Edith Smith. He also is a frustrated character because his parents treat him very much like a child. They don't really regard him with much respect. Sheila is probably more of a sympathetic character because later on in the play she does admit her responsibility and she does show remorse. However, at the start of the play she is represented as somebody who is a little bit immature, a little bit giddy, very excited. And then we've got Gerald Croft, who is very much at ease and well-bred young man about town, as it says in the stage directions. He's engaged to Sheila, and we do become less sympathetic towards him as the play goes on. He is more like the older Berlings, and he doesn't really learn from his mistakes. So, what I would like you to do for your independent home learning task, I'm going to show you in a minute that I've got 5 slides which are all to do with context. So each prompt card has got a series of questions. You should use those questions to research using the internet, or it might be that you can remember things from when we were back at school. As I say, there are 5, so it might be that you can only manage to do 1 or 2, or, you know, by all means, if you are interested and you end up doing all 5, that would be fantastic. So, for example, we've got a prompt card on the Titanic. So a quote here from Berling: "Why, a friend of mine went over this new liner last week, the Titanic. She sails next week, 46,800 tons. New York in 5 days, and every luxury, and unsinkable, absolutely unsinkable. So you might know that is obviously full of irony, but we've got some questions on this slide to help you to think deeper and to develop your knowledge of that part of the context. You've also got a slide there on World War I and World War II. Another quote from Berling: "You'll hear some people say that war's inevitable, and to that I say, fiddlesticks. The Germans don't want war. Nobody wants war, except some half-civilized folks in the Balkans." Again, another ironic statement by Berling. So go through the questions and have a think. You might be able to use your general knowledge, your knowledge of history, if you're doing history GCSE, that might be able to be useful too. There's also the Great Depression, there's labour and striking, and you might be interested to consider the differences between capitalism and socialism. You don't have to do all 5. Choose which one you think you'd be most interested in. Start with that, and then if you've got time, you can do a second or third one. So just to finish, you may know the answer to these questions already, all right? But if you maybe missed your lessons on an inspector calls, it's time to make some predictions. So are the Berlings the innocent, happy family that they first appear to be in the opening scene? What do you think will happen to the Berlings? When the inspector arrives, he informs the Berlings that a girl has died after apparently committing suicide. How do you think the Berlings are involved? Do you have any other thoughts on the Berlings at this point? So what do you do now? Go back in the slides and find those prompt cards: capitalism versus socialism, World War I and II, the Titanic, and so on. Choose one to start with. Write down your notes. You can write them in paragraphs or bullet points. You can do it as a spider diagram. However you find revising, most useful to you, you can do it like that. So if it's using pictures, if they help, or using different colours, I don't mind at all how you present it. It's whatever is helpful to you. Take a picture of it, and then if you email it to my address, which is on the screen, and then I'll be able to give you some feedback on that straight away. In addition, we're also going to be holding some drop-in sessions this week. So if you've got any other questions about today's lesson, or if there's anything at all that you want to ask about the other work that we've got on the website, you can ask then. I hope you found today's lesson helpful, and I will see you again next time. Take care.